You guys doing good? Good. You ready to be taught? You ready to be schooled? All right. Good morning, everybody. How's this volume? If we could have the elders sit down, we'll begin class. Well, good morning, everybody. It's good to see you. See if I can work all this technology here. Really looking forward to using this. What's that? All right. My name is Rodney Diller. I was supposed to teach this class a couple weeks ago. You're not in a time warp. It is not January 16th, but first, due to Rona and then a quick trip to Mexico, I've been out of pocket here a couple of weeks. So we're going to kind of backtrack in what we were looking at, what Jeff taught last week. Thank you for anybody who is watching online or who will watch online. Remember that this is broadcast to the world, so keep that in mind as you speak, and if you share an intimate thought about, your best friend who's not watching or in the room. They might be, so keep that in mind. So this morning is going to be set up a little bit like the kind of movie that I really hate. Do you ever go to a movie and in the first 5 minutes of the movie, they show you the last scene? And then after that last scene is shown, they say, 2 years earlier, or 2 months earlier. And then we have to watch a whole movie to build up to what we already know is going to happen. I really hate that. I would go into the movie 5 minutes late if I knew that. But because my material is kind of leading to what Jeff spoke on a little bit, it's going to be a little bit like that. So if you're here last week, you're going to get a little bit more of the grounding principles that Jeff taught on. And as we look at this study, and hopefully this is what you've been doing this whole time, I want you to encourage you to stay open about just being a lifelong learner. If you're afraid to be wrong, if you're afraid to try something new, if you're worse, if you're afraid to admit that you're wrong, you're basically done learning. Like, if you're afraid to try something and potentially be wrong, you're done learning. You only have what is within you. Don't agree with everything in this book. It's written by men. We're all flawed. They have different ideas, but I want to encourage you to keep an open mind here. So, God has always desired to be in community with us, to do life together with us. Question, just off the top of your head, when was the first time God demonstrated his desire to do life with us? Creation, yeah. From the beginning, God wanted to do life with us, right? When I was a kid and I was reading, the creation story and the fall of man, what I saw as a kid with a parent was, Dad's in the garden, here he comes, he's looking to get him in trouble, right? God was in the garden because he wanted to have a relationship with his creation, right? So from that, from creation, he then has, his prophets and ultimately his son, right, to facilitate that relationship. So here we are, a couple thousand years after Christ, and this model here, that's out of order, maybe? We need to help me out here, Daryl. Yeah, can you I'll just click through real quick, maybe find. Everybody don't look at anything. So, I'll just tell you what it is. So, up to this point, churches in the 20th, 21st century have been modeled after this traditional attractional church model, okay? It's this pyramid. At the bottom is congregation members. Next, you have staff. You have lay leaders. And at the top is this pastor, okay? On the outside of that is the culture. And basically, if you want to get yourself into this structure, then, you know, that's the structure that's in place. The way that you are still not, okay. The way that that structure engages the culture is basically come to us, come through the front door, and you can be involved with what we're doing here. In Adullam, which is the church that the founders of this book started, they said, we've made the deliberate decision not to be very excellent or polished during our main gathering, simply because we don't want to create an environment that is so good that it causes people to feel positioned or as observers. Because I want myself and our people to have time to be incarnational in the world, we don't take up their time working on the church service. We don't have a worship practice, and he goes on to say, I only spend a couple of hours preparing for his last lesson. This is probably one of the more controversial statements in this whole book. So what do you think of this statement? Basically he's saying, you know, we want to worship God in an honorable way, and we want to do church right, but we're not going to spend a lot of our time on it because it's not what we feel like is important. Thoughts? Daryl might have some thoughts on that. John?
I think change is really hard. I think changing culture is exceptionally hard. I know when we got married, not doing things the way that Kelly's family had always done them was, if I wanted to do something a different way, for instance, our family makes, the Mitchell family makes Southern cornbread stuffing differently than the Davis family makes Southern cornbread stuffing. I made the mistake one time of saying, I'll bring the stuffing. So that happened one time. They were nice about it, but it wasn't the right thing. And so change is hard. So if you're saying, hey, we really want to move from an emphasis on Sunday morning to an emphasis on something other than Sunday morning, it's almost like what they're saying is we had to have a funeral for Sunday morning. We had to dismantle it in order to in order to have an disruptive enough change to get people's minds to, well, but this is what we're going to do. It's what we always do. It's what we've always done. And so I think you're right. It is a controversial statement, and it is something that I don't necessarily think that we would, want to jump into. But I can understand motivation behind saying, look, if we don't do something different, we're always going to get the same thing. And I think the desire to say, we're willing to do something that's painful because we really believe that God has a desire for us as a church to reach the lost and to change a mindset that currently isn't working, that I think is admirable. Not fun, but admirable.
It is admirable. We also have the situation that if this says polish, I kind of like that. If we polish Sunday morning, then we focus on Sunday morning and no other time. Or
Yes.
I think we lose some of our children. They grow up in youth group and they're used to spontaneous worship. A lot of times, whether it be at camp or, you know, as a kid, when I was a kid, it might just be sitting down in the middle of a roller skating rink after a session of roller skating, or after a meal at in someone's home, and it was all spontaneous. You sang by memory. It was led with spontaneity. There was testimony spontaneously, and then all of a sudden they have to shift, or I myself went through this. We have to shift to a more formal and rehearsed form of worship, and I think we lose some of our kids as a result.
Yeah, I think some of the more memorable services or times at Oakdale have been in times of disarray or, you know, a tragedy of some sort that altered what we were planning on doing. Yeah, I think there's something to be leaving room, you know, for the Spirit to act. It's hard to put the Holy Spirit in the program and exactly where that's going to go in. But yeah, Daryl, if you can see that, lift up the hood 105 on somewhere. That's what I've got next on mine. Maybe I've got mine out of order. But he says here, since we know that most sojourners don't wake up Sunday mornings looking for a good sermon, we decided to put our energy, efforts, and focus into the incarnational aspect of our church instead of the presentational aspect. So basically, they're doing a lot of what you were just talking about kind of flipping the importance of the week. Sunday for them is a time to get together and to nurse each other's wounds, to offer encouragement, to, you know, see how they can be there for one another. But they've really flipped the week to where, what can they be doing on Sunday that will help them and encourage them on their missional activities the other 6 days of the week? Pretty revolutionary stuff, I think, honestly, for the way our churches are generally structured now. Even the name church service, I've just always hated that word service, as if this activity of us being here is of service to God, or even service to, you know, non-Christians, people who are seeking. This is what we do here is mostly about us. Let's be honest. Daryl, if you can find one that says the pyramid structure it's up there. Okay. So this is kind of, in a nutshell, why they've kind of flipped their script, why they've changed their pyramid. The pyramid structure was an appropriate form when a large portion of the culture valued and looked for a good church to go to. When the leaders were respected by the culture, and when people assumed you go to church to find God, the form fit the function. But when the culture is no longer looking for a church to go to, isn't that interested in church music, sermons, or programs, or when they don't innately value or trust church leaders, the functions of church must be adjusted, and thus the form must adjust in kind. So tell me, is this a fair assessment of our culture outside of church? Yes. So, ever since graduating college, I've been in sales, one form or the other, medical sales for a few years, and then realtor for a couple of decades. And, you know, in my first career in pharmaceutical sales, you go into and talk to a doctor, and you'd hit him with one spiel, and he'd say, I don't even believe in that class of drugs. It's like, okay, all right, let me make note of that. You come in the next time, you have a piece of information, you hit him with a different spiel. Same product, you know, same thing, same clientele, different angle. You adjusted your scripts to meet the occasion. And then you go into the next doctor's office who thinks totally different, and then all of a sudden, hey, forget about this part of the drug. Now we're going to talk about this part of the drug. We do this all the time outside of church, but it doesn't seem like we really do that inside the church. Adjust. Daryl, give me what is the main function. What is the main function? And he's talking about the church. I hope you now agree that the primary function is to actively move into the culture, to embody and enflesh the good news into every nook and cranny of this world. I hope you now agree. I hope you do too, but this is not how we act or what we do generally. We kind of know it, I hope. The function of the church is to be God's missionary hands to a world that is looking for something tangible to grab onto. If that is the function, then the form must allow for this to happen. This means that the incarnational church must have a new structure. So let's look at that new structure for a second. So you can see up there on slide 2 our traditional kind of hierarchy there. They've basically turned the hierarchy on its side, okay? You got culture everywhere going on here. I kind of feel like John Madden. This is cool. You got the culture. No, I can't do a Madden. And then right in here is the church. This is the missional people, okay? Not a lot of hierarchy shown on this diagram, okay? You have everybody on mission together, okay? So what's missing on this diagram here? A couple of things are missing. One, there's not a lot of emphasis given to who's up here or who's back here, you know. There's not a lot of emphasis on who the preacher is, who the elders are, deacons. You have missional people. You have people on a mission to be the hands and feet of God. And then you got this over here. I'm not quite sure what this is yet. Go ahead and give me the next one. We're going to get to that big blob on the left here in just a moment. But first, let's read this. Tell me what you think. Pastors should provide only what the followers of Christ can't get on their own. Said another way, followers can expect the pastors to give them what they can provide for themselves. Even more important, followers should expect to give what they can provide to others. Followers should expect to give what they can provide to others. No more free rides or backseat drivers. It's time to cram a whole lot more people up front. So, who are the missional people? They are the individuals committed to forming their character and lifestyle after those of Christ, and who are compelled to live out their faith in the context of a community. Ideally, we would just call those people Christians, right? At least once a week, I get an email from someone who has found our website and reads our story, or I'm sure reads their book just like we did. They're usually from people who have burned out on their own church and are searching the internet for another. The writers usually want to be a part of an emerging church, as they often put it. Yet, after a few months of participating with us, the initial inspiration and intrigue tends to wear off, and their true interest emerges: consumerism. Go ahead and give me the next diagram. So here's the diagram, kind of all fleshed out here. So culture, we still have over here. We still have the missional people that are here, okay? And think of this whole thing as generally, a church structure right through here. Then you have these sojourners over here, and these are the people that are curious. These are the people that are searching. They're looking. Something is missing. They're looking, okay? So notice that this line around the sojourners is dashed, okay? Those dashed lines there represent that the sojourners, they're free to come. They're free to go, okay? They are interacting with these missional people in kind of a no strings attached way, okay? And then you have this over here, okay? These people are in the church, but in no way are they interacting with sojourners. Pew sitters is what they call them. They go into great detail in this book about trying to keep the DNA of their church pure and trying to eliminate basically those little shapes outside of the missional people, the pew sitters. They think that if you have pew sitters in your church, then eventually, and by pew sitters, it's consumers, it's takers rather than givers. Then at some point, you're going to have more pew sitters, and you're going to have more pew sitters, and that will corrupt your church's DNA, and soon you will have no missional people. They go as far, I can't remember if Jeff talked about it or not, but they go as far as to have what they call a death talk. Joining this church was very different than joining the Oakdale Church of Christ. If you were to come here and you talk to the elders and say, hey, we'd like to place membership. Okay, where have you been? We were worshiping over here. Now we've moved into town and we're worshiping here. And we'd like to worship with you. Okay, you're announced. You're a member, okay? At this church, it's a little bit more like joining a biker gang, okay? So you don't have to kill anybody to get a patch, but it's just short of that. So kind of like a biker gang, you have this kind of trial period where you're a familiar, you're kind of somebody that we think has got potential, but you're not a part of the gang yet. So they do this process of getting to know you and showing you what it's like to live a missional life, to be a part of a missional church. And then after a couple of months of inviting these people into their houses and doing things with them and for them, they have what they call a death talk. And they say, basically, okay, you know how you've been in my house and you've been eating my food and I've been fixing your car or whatever the circumstance is. Now we expect that of you. I'm sure it's better said than that, but basically at this point when people hear what it really is to be a part of a missional church, they lose roughly half the people at that point that, you know, said they wanted to be a part of the church. They go find another church that they have a list of what they feel like is good Bible teaching churches in the Denver area. And they say, okay, you're not ready for this, here's this. And that is very different. Very, very different. But I think it has some merit. I think that John laughs about first time that I emailed him, I believe. I think I emailed you and Frank Smith, who were integral in getting this church started back in 2008 or 9, whatever it was. I had just moved out of Edmond into Oakdale in 2008, and it was announced that the church was going to be considering forming this church plant here. And I'd never met John. I'd never met Frank. I was at a mega church with them, but didn't even know what Frank looked like. I had been in one of John's classes before. But so I fired off an email that basically was like, I'm very invested in this, I think is what I said. I live in this community, and if I'm going to be giving up what I think is a pretty sweet place to worship and to do church, I need to know who I'm throwing in with. And I said a few other things, and I was already fairly invested, even though I just heard about it. And I think John fired off an email to Frank. It's like, you know who this guy is? It's like, have you ever heard of this guy? Like, no. Neither one of them knew me. But I think we really want, when people come to join us in this work here, we want to give them an idea of what it is to be a member here. And we want for them to understand that the church is a hospital. It's a place where you go for healing and for restoration and for upliftment. But it's also a place to leave every week, okay? We come, we're healed, we lift each other up, we leave. And that's just not comfortable for a lot of people. Let's talk about Sojourners just for a second. Daryl, skip a couple and go to that one that says, today if we met someone. So this is one that is interesting. I'd like your feedback. It says, today, if we met someone who loved Jesus but didn't know he was God, I doubt we would call that person a Christian, let alone use them in ministry. Yet Jesus did. I submit that for the entire time the disciples were with Jesus, they were what we would now call sojourners, spiritually disoriented God seekers. So I'm just curious, do you think that's a fair classification of the apostles? Would you say that Jesus used sojourners in his ministry?
One thing that comes to like he tapped them on the shoulder rather than them going and saying, hey, I'm looking for something, you know, what can you offer me?
Yes. John?
I have loved part of the DNA of this church in that we ask people to do stuff early. Much earlier, I think, than they are even comfortable being asked. I heard somebody else say Oakdale's kind of like run until tackle.
Mm.
And that always makes me giggle. And it also kind of makes me happy that this is a place where you don't need permission to do what God's called you to do. But even more so, and I would like to see more of it, is that more people get tapped on the shoulder, regardless of where they are journeying with us, and asked to participate. And I know that makes people uncomfortable. I remember really early when we were meeting over at the school, we had a young man who was journeying with us. He had not been baptized, and he was up front reading scripture one Sunday morning. And I had a member ask me, are we okay with somebody who's not a member and not baptized reading scripture? And I remember saying to them, could you say that out loud one more time? And they're like, oh, that sounds different when I said it again. And I'm like, yeah, we are okay with that. And that's different. That's different than how you and I were brought up. That's bringing the wrong stuffing to Thanksgiving. And it makes people uncomfortable. But it may be what I loved about the book. Is there's a lot of things in the book that we don't do. And I don't know if you guys know, Adolin is no longer meeting. So we don't go, look at what, incredible, they were incredible, and look at where they are. They're now taking over no. But they were looking for what should the church look like now that the world is different? How should the church get into these nooks and crannies? And so I don't know, this idea that even the disciples didn't really know what they were getting into, but yet they were asked to participate, I think is a really interesting piece of information.
Did I see a hand over here? Head scratcher, nose picker, maybe? I don't know if I was going to have it later on. I don't know if I'll get to it, but I want to jump off of what Phil said there just for a minute about Jesus always seemed to be going to people and tapping them, and rather than people coming to Jesus. Let's talk just for a second about we call it Jesus' ministry, right? From, was it 30 to 33? Is that what we think roughly? 3-year ministry. Let's think about when we say, if I were a missionary, how would I describe my day-to-day life as a missionary? And I know there's not enough books in the world to record everything that Jesus did in his time on earth, but from what is recorded, what did Jesus do? How did Jesus spend his time? Where was Jesus at? Or maybe, the hint to get people talking, where was Jesus not at for most of the stories that are recorded?
God was just walking around. He's just different places, roads.
Just walking around, right?
Very few scenes in a synagogue.
Very few. Yeah, we had him as a child, right? And then, knocking tables over, making whips. There's a couple, but not many. Yeah, think about the stories that we have of Jesus. The guy's thirsty. He goes to the well, right? What does he encounter there? The woman at the well, right? He's making things like inviting himself to lunch at people's houses, which is an odd thing. I assume that was only a thing that you could do in Jesus' time. I don't suggest that be your first move in missional activity is to invite yourself to somebody's house for lunch. But, I mean, how many times does he eat every day? You know? Those were missional activities that were just repurposed, right? He's thirsty. He goes to the well. He meets the lady at the well. Kind of changes her life. Go forth, sin no more, right? I think this was the big takeaway for me over a decade ago when I read this, is that we do we do probably a great job of not feeling empowered, but feeling guilt and shame for our lack of converting people to Jesus through this model that we've set up for the last century or so. And this book was amazingly freeing to think that your day-to-day activities, that is your mission. That's where you're coming in contact with these people. They're not strangers behind a door that you've never been inside the house. They're the people that you come in contact with daily. Maybe that made sense to everybody before this. It just never clicked. And then to further feel guilt, then I felt guilty for feeling like I wasted a lot of time. Lifetime learners. Jeff.
The other feeling that I got after this, the freedom was really important. The empowerment of you are the missionary. Like, it's not a paid position. It is you, it is me with all the people that I'm already in contact with. Like, that's your job. Go do that job. Like this is, I've put this on you to do these things, to be for these people what I need you to be. And so, like, there was a renewed sense of purpose, I guess.
Yes.
I don't know if that's the right way to say that, but it was just like, oh, like right now, like not, like this isn't like your feeling of wasted time and guilt. Like, I got that. I was like, yeah, like I have just not done this at all. And then I realized, like, well, then start today. Like, start right now. Just go do that thing right now, because like this is that moment. The people that are around you are those people. Like, be empowered to go. Like, God is begging you to do those things in that area that you currently are. You don't have to go other places. Like, he's put people in your life that need him. And you are that person. So go and be that person.
Yes. Anybody else? Go ahead, Daryl, and skip forward to inviting in and living out. This is an 11 o'clock, is that right? Okay. So we're going to kind of zoom a little bit here at the end. So what does all this mean if we're not just expecting people to just show up in this church and have their lives transformed. Well, it involves inviting in and living out. And those living out practices, next slide, goes to 4 different categories that he lays out here. 1 is leaving, 2 is living among, 3 is listening to, and 4 is loving with no strings attached, which is hard. Next slide says, in order for us to change the incorrect assumptions that people have about God and his followers, their programmed responses, we've got to get to the point where they consider us one of them, the parameter change. To do this is not a matter of evangelism or outreach or missions. It's a matter of living out like Jesus did, okay? This is kind of what we were talking about earlier. So what is that? Leaving, the first one. Examples of leaving. Dinner with Sojourners. You can go to the next one, Daryl. Dinner with Sojourners. Jesus did that a lot. Doing what you love with others. This whole idea of repurposing what you're already doing. Going out of your way to build relationships, which is what Jesus was doing the majority of the time. Looking for chances to talk. And this next one, next slide, is probably where we should end. But the first question there says, what are some things you love to do that would be easy to invite sojourners to do with you? Think about that. Do it. But this last one is where I want to end. What are some things that might be a struggle to give up in order to spend time connecting with people? I'm going to tell you from my personal experience. I have, over the last, 7 or 8 years maybe, spent a lot more time trying to build relationships and live in my community, being a part of my community in a missional way than I have spent time building relationships with the majority of you. That was a conscious decision. It was doing a community small group on Sundays with people in my neighborhood rather than getting to know you guys better. That's something that I weighed, and I thought it was worth it. I thought it was worth it. It takes time. It takes energy to invest in people. John is a great example. He has invested in me so much. And I can be a hard guy to invest in. But there may be times that you don't do that family dinner by yourself in a comfortable situation. You might do that with somebody that you want to get to know better, that you want to build a relationship with. Or for a cheapskate like me, sometimes it means going to a restaurant that I hate that costs more than I want to spend. Sometimes. The cost is minimal, though, guys. What you give up in time and effort and energy to be missional, I promise, the energy you receive from that It'll get you to Sunday, I promise. I appreciate you guys being here. Next week, I will wrap up the book. We'll try to do a quick recap of the whole book. If that's even possible, I don't know. But, and then we'll finish with the last couple of chapters. Thank you so much for your comments, and we'll see you next week.